Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Play. I'm Noam. My co-host is Keegan Brown, and today we will discuss hiring diversity in sports with a very special guest, Chaim Bloom, the Chief Baseball Officer for the Boston Red Sox.
Chaim is in his third season in Boston after working for the Tampa Bay Rays for 15 seasons. We hope you enjoyed this episode.
Chaim Bloom, welcome to Beyond the Play. Thank you for joining us today. First of all, how are you doing?
Doing all right. Not bad.
So,
just riding the roller coaster of the early season.
Yeah, it's early. Speaking of early, Major League Baseball just honored Jackie Robinson on April 15th, always one of the most memorable moments of the first month of baseball. This marked 75 years since he made his Major League debut and broke the color barrier. In his last public speech before his death, Jackie said,
"I'm extremely proud and pleased to be here this afternoon, but must admit I'm going to be tremendously more pleased and more proud when I look at that third base coaching line one day and see a black face managing in baseball." Thank you very much.
Now, the sport has made some historic hires in recent years. Your organization hired Bianca Smith last year. She was the first Black female coach in the history of professional baseball. And Kim Ng, the general manager of the Marlins, who was hired in 2020, is also the first female GM in baseball. But there are just two Black managers in baseball this season, in Dusty Baker and Dave Roberts. So 75 years after Jackie broke the color barrier, how do you think the MLB is doing right now in terms of fulfilling his legacy?
Well, I think if you don't look around and see room for improvement, you're just not paying attention, I think. And look, we should be proud as a sport of some of the strides that we have made, as shameful as it is that those strides have been necessary. I think you could argue, and it might even be beyond argument, that the day of Jackie's debut is the most significant day in the history of baseball. But the reasons for that are exactly the reasons why we continue to have work to do. The facts you just mentioned, when you look around at, who participates or can participate in our game, just tells you that we aren't doing a good enough job of leveling the playing field so that the pipeline is as representative as it should be.
Now, one of the ways that Major League Baseball is working on that is the Selig Rule, which requires teams interview at least one minority candidate for every managerial or front office role. Now, your manager, Cora, said that when he was going through the interview process a few years ago, he felt one team interviewed him just to check a box, saying, quote, "I felt they interviewed me just because I was a minority." So how does the Selig Rule play a role in your hiring procedures, and what can be done to improve the rule?
Yeah, you would hope that for any position, we are, even if the rule didn't exist, we would organically have a diverse enough slate of candidates not to need it. But we know that's not always the case. And so I think it's a mixed bag in the sense that I do think that the rule sometimes will cause some diverse candidates who might otherwise not have gotten a shot to present themselves to do so. And that can be a real positive. On the other hand, if somebody is interviewed just to check a box, or if they feel like they were interviewed just to check a box, that's really shameful. That shouldn't happen. I think the intent of the rule is good in that, sometimes, I can tell you this, I've been in situations, including situations where we've hired really good people, where the reason they were on our radar to begin with as a candidate is because someone else had them in a process and said, you have to talk to so-and-so. And so to the extent that a diverse candidate who might otherwise have been ignored gets into a process because of a rule like that and then does well, even if they don't get the job, that could put them in position to get a job in the future. So if the rule is doing that, it's doing some good things. We just need to make sure that it's not about box checking. And I don't know how you legislate that, and I don't want to lose the good things that the rule has created. But, it's something that, again, you hope that organizations don't need the rule to create a diverse slate of candidates, but to the extent that it does give more diverse candidates a platform that they otherwise might not get, then that's a benefit I wouldn't want to lose, even as we look for ways to improve.
Now, more on your guy, Cora. He's the first Latino Red Sox manager, as well as the first Puerto Rican manager to win a World Series in the MLB. What does this mean for you as the general manager of the organization?
Well, I obviously, unsurprisingly, think it's wonderful. Think Alex is wonderful. Just due to all the different circumstances that happened in 2020, I did have the opportunity to go and hire Alex out of a process. But I was not the guy, and Dave deserves a ton of credit for that, to give him the job initially, and to be here when he won that World Series. I think more than anything, it's a credit to the organization, credit to the players that were on that club, and to Alex himself. But I know how much it meant to Alex. I know how much it means to Puerto Ricans around the game to see somebody, one of their own do that. It to me speaks to the power of representation. We were experiencing this too with women in baseball, that we're seeing more representation come in areas where there really is no good reason for there not to be representation. But until there is, the pipeline doesn't fill up the way it should, because people need to be able, in many cases, to see somebody who looks like them doing the job to feel that they have a shot to do it. And there's a lot of value to that.
Absolutely. And back to the Selig Rule in baseball, the NFL has a similar rule called the Rooney Role, which in recent months has played a role in an increasingly prevalent conversation about hiring diversity in the sports world. This rule also requires teams to interview minority candidates for coaching roles. In the coming season, an addition has been made to that rule that all 32 clubs must employ a female or a member of an ethnic or racial minority to serve as an offensive assistant coach. In early February, NFL coach Brian Flores sued the NFL, as well as the Dolphins, Broncos, and Giants, alleging discrimination regarding his interview process for head coaching jobs. Then in early April, Pete Carroll called out NFL owners, saying that the hiring of minority candidates won't improve unless owners accept that there are candidates out there who are different than themselves. At home here in Stores, UConn football just hired Mickey Grace as an offensive analyst. She is one of few women, and even fewer women of color, to work on a Division I college football staff. So Chaim, my question to you, why is it important that the media covers these topics, and why is it crucial that a conversation is sparked surrounding the issue?
The more attention that is drawn to some of these issues, these problems, I think the greater the likelihood that any organization is going to fix them. And, as I said, it's hard for me to speak to the NFL not being involved in it. But, in our industry, I think there's benefits to those rules. They're important. They're also not a substitute for culture. And, culture determines a lot of who you look at and who you hire. And the more visible all those issues are, the better we're going to do to address them. I think one thing that happens that I become very conscious of in my career is that, I think when you, as I do, when you look like most of the people in the business, in terms of my gender, my skin color, you don't live a lot of the things that people live that might, where the playing field might be tilted a little bit against them. And so in order to try to fix those things, we have to be aware of them first. And if you don't experience them, you may not be aware of them. And so the dialogue is really important to, open everybody's eyes as to what obstacles might exist, even if they don't exist intentionally. We still have, we still have a responsibility. We might not be guilty, but we are responsible for, solving these issues. And I think the more visibility that they get, the greater the chance that we're going to do something to solve them.
And to your point, looking at baseball, historically, MLB has been a white man's league. And with an increased awareness of the importance of diversity, where do you maybe see the MLB in 5 to 10 years in terms of progression for hiring diversity, things like that?
Well, I hope we continue to advance here. I think it's in our interest commercially, in addition to being the right thing to do. To whatever extent there exists a perception that this is a white man's sport, that A, shouldn't exist, and B, that's not how the sport should be. It's not anybody's sport to say who belongs and who doesn't belong. This game is here before all of us. I hope and believe it will be here after all of us, and it belongs to everybody.
And that actually segues perfectly to our last question. Two of the most popular guys on the Sox right now are Xander Bogaerts, Rafael Devers. How do those two players and players like them, the Fernando Tatises of the league, help to make baseball more inclusive, more representative, and ultimately play a role in engaging the younger audience in baseball?
Well, a lot of it in the case of those two guys, it goes to really who they are as people and the dynamic individuals that they are. I mean, you look at Bogey in part because of where he comes from and the languages he grew up speaking. He can tie together the whole clubhouse because he can communicate with everybody, and that's true of Rafi too. Obviously, like he is gets along with everybody in our clubhouse and is, an incredible unifying force on this club. And when you look at, what they mean to the public, what they mean to our fans, when you take dynamic people who perform and who win for a city, and as amazing a baseball market as this place is, that is going to build a lot of loyalty in people who may or may not know people who look like Xander, who look like Rafi in their daily lives, but they're going to love those guys. They're going to respect them, not just because of what they do on the field, but how they do it.
Chaim, thank you so much for joining our show today. We really appreciate your insight and input on this really important topic.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you guys having me and bringing up this topic. As I said, I think the more we're willing to talk about this, the more we're going to realize not just be proud of what we've accomplished, but also realize what we have yet to accomplish and be able to come together as a sport to do it.
Absolutely. We totally agree. That's exactly why we're doing this, really, to continue these conversations and push it to, what's next. So on behalf of Keegan Brown and the UCTV sports crew, I'm Noam. Thanks for tuning into this episode of Beyond the Play.